I don't think I could do this anymore. I don't know why, but I'm okay with walking away from this because there's no way I'm dragging down the legacy.
Thursday night, July 23rd, 2026. Madison Square Garden, 64 years old, and Jon Bon Jovi is standing in the same building where he's played some of the biggest nights of his career. This is the 8th show of a 9-night residency, the centerpiece of a tour billed simply as Forever. For 90 minutes, it looks like any other night. 14 songs in. You Give Love a Bad Name. It's My Life. The crowd is loud, the band is tight, and nobody in that arena expects what happens next. Before the final song of the set, Bon Jovi stops. He looks out at the crowd and tells them something he says isn't like him. I know I'm letting you down, he admits, and it's not like me to do that. Then he asks for help. Not from his band, from the audience. They're going to do one more song, he says, and he's going to need every voice in the building to get through it. That song is Livin' on a Prayer, arguably the most recognizable rock anthem of the last 40 years, a song this man has sung thousands of times without a second thought. Except tonight, he can't finish it alone. Somewhere in the crowd, Train frontman Pat Monahan, there simply as a fan, gets pulled up to help carry the vocals. The band raps, the house lights come up early, and a show that was supposed to run over 2 hours quietly ends closer to 90 minutes. For most performers, an early exit is a footnote. A bad night, a bug going around, nothing worth dissecting. But this isn't most performers, and this isn't a normal night. Because 4 years earlier, this same man wasn't sure he'd ever stand on a stage like this again. To understand why one shortened concert sent shockwaves through the music world, you have to go back more than a decade to the moment everything started to crack. Rewind to 2013. Bon Jovi is mid-tour, deep into the Because We Can Run, when longtime guitarist Richie Sambora, his creative partner for 30 years, co-writer of nearly every song that made this band a household name, abruptly walks away. Hours before a show in Calgary, Sambora is simply gone. The band presses on. Guitarist Phil X steps in. And behind the scenes, Jon Bon Jovi is left carrying a weight almost nobody outside the band fully understood at the time. Sambora would later say the decision came down to family. His daughter, Ava, needed him home, and 3 decades of 18-month tours had taken a toll he couldn't keep paying. It wasn't about drugs, he insisted, though tabloids speculated otherwise for years. Whatever the full truth, the effect on the band's frontman was immediate and lasting. Without his longtime foil to lean on, Jon found himself carrying more of the vocal and creative load, night after night, tour after tour. What followed was a slow, almost invisible unraveling. Bon Jovi has said his vocal problems trace back to around 2015. Not a single injury, not one bad night, but years of accumulated strain that crept in quietly while the hits kept selling out arenas. Tour after tour through the back half of the 2010s, the wear kept building. Then came a pause nobody saw coming. A global pandemic that shut down live music entirely, sidelining every performer on Earth, Bon Jovi included, for the better part of 2 years. You might think the forced rest would have helped. In some ways, it only delayed a reckoning. When touring finally resumed, the voice that had powered this band for 4 decades wasn't bouncing back the way it always had. Bon Jovi later described it in blunt, physical terms, comparing himself to an aging athlete whose body simply stops cooperating the way it used to, no matter how much training or discipline you bring to it. Even though I'm trained, he would eventually admit, eventually the body gives out. By 2022, the cracks weren't just audible to Jon anymore. They were audible to everyone around him. Reviews of that year's tour dates began quietly noting a rougher edge to his voice, a strain that fans who'd followed this band for decades weren't used to hearing. Behind the scenes, he had already tried the conventional fixes, vocal rest, therapy exercises, adjusting his approach on stage, the kind of quiet workarounds performers lean on for years before ever admitting something is seriously wrong. None of it was enough, and it would take the one voice he trusted more than any critics, his wife's, to finally say out loud what everyone else had been dancing around. That conversation would change everything. It's where our story picks up next. the diagnosis nobody wanted to hear, the surgery that came with no guarantees, and the years-long fight to get back to a stage he wasn't sure he'd ever stand on again. Somewhere in the middle of a 2022 tour stop, Jon Bon Jovi and his wife of over 3 decades, Dorothea, had a conversation that he has since called devastating. She told him, plainly, that a recent performance wasn't great. Not cruel, not dramatic, just honest. The kind of honesty that's almost impossible to hear from anyone else when you've spent 40 years being told you're a legend. But it was exactly the kind of honesty he needed. By his own account, that moment forced him to face a choice he'd been avoiding: get real medical help or accept that his days fronting a band might be over. He chose to find out what was actually wrong. What doctors found wasn't a mystery illness or a freak accident. It was the accumulated cost of decades of use. One of his vocal cords had atrophied, weakened to the point that the stronger cord was compensating by overworking itself, pushing the weaker one aside every time he tried to sing. Bon Jovi later described the mismatch in almost comically physical terms. One cord like a thumb, the other like a pinky, doing a job they were never built to share equally. My craft, he said, was being taken from me. In the summer of 2022, he underwent a procedure called medialization, a surgery designed to reinforce the underperforming cord so the two could work in balance again. It wasn't a guaranteed fix. It wasn't even a full restoration. It was a chance. And going in, nobody, not his doctors, not his bandmates, not John himself, knew exactly what would come out the other side. The surgery itself was only the beginning. What followed was months of relearning how to use a voice that had just been physically altered, adjusting technique, testing limits in a therapist's office long before ever testing them in front of a paying crowd. There was no shortcut through it. Every gain came slowly, and every setback raised the same unanswered question. Would this ever be enough to carry a full arena tour again, or was this the version of his voice he'd have to accept for good? He wasn't entirely alone in the experience. Singer Shania Twain, who had gone through the same surgery with the same doctor years earlier, became what Bon Jovi called his spirit sister through the ordeal, proof that even legends need someone who's walked the exact same road. What followed wasn't a triumphant comeback story. It was years, plural, of vocal therapy, uncertainty, and doubt. Bon Jovi has said he worked on his voice daily, with no promise it would ever return to what it once was. By early 2024, speaking publicly about it for the first time in real detail, he admitted just how close he'd come to walking away entirely. If the singing is not great, if I can't be the guy I once was, he said, then I'm done, and I'm good with that. He added a line that would follow him for the rest of the year, half self-deprecating, half deadly serious. He never needed to become the fat Elvis, the diminished, past his prime version of a legend, still performing long after the magic was gone. That admission and the years of struggle behind it became the backbone of a 2024 Hulu docuseries, Thank You, Good Night, the Bon Jovi story, which put his recovery on camera for the world to see. It was, by most accounts, the most vulnerable he'd ever been in public, and it reopened old wounds, too, including his complicated relationship with Richie Sambora, who appeared in the series and later said he regretted how he'd left the band, even as he stood by his reasons for going. For a moment, it looked like the documentary might bring the two men back together on stage. Sambora watched early cuts at John's house. Both men, by John's account, felt no animosity. But when the Forever Tour was finally announced in October 2025, the band's first tour in 4 years, Sambora's name was nowhere on the bill. Reports at the time pointed to a pay dispute as the sticking point, though neither camp has confirmed exactly what went wrong behind closed doors. Whatever the reason, the guitarist who co-wrote most of the band's biggest songs would not be standing beside Bon Jovi when he finally walked back out onto a stage. What mattered most in the end wasn't who was missing, it was whether the voice that had carried this band for over 40 years could still do the job. Bon Jovi and the band spent the better part of 2 years quietly testing that question, gathering monthly to rehearse and gauge his progress before ever committing to a single date. By his own account, nothing else mattered until he could confidently deliver a full 2.5-hour show night after night. Only when he believed would he agree to tour again? That belief would be tested almost immediately in the very city and the very venue where his comeback was supposed to be proven once and for all. July 7th, 2026, Madison Square Garden. After 4 years away from full touring, Jon Bon Jovi walks back onto a stage built for a homecoming. It's the opening night of the Forever Tour, and by every account, it's triumphant. A symbolic full-circle moment for a singer who not long before had openly wondered if this night would ever come. The band is together. The voice, at least for one night, holds. It's the payoff to years of quiet, unglamorous rehabilitation nobody but his inner circle fully witnessed. But one good night was never the real test. The real test was what came next, a grueling 9-show residency at the same arena stretched out over roughly 3 weeks, with barely a night off in between. 2.5-hour sets, full set lists, the exact schedule he'd spent 2 years proving he could handle in rehearsal rooms, now being asked of him for real night after night in front of tens of thousands of people who'd paid to hear the voice they remembered. For the first 7 shows, it worked. Fans who'd waited 4 years for this moment got full sets, familiar deep cuts, and a voice that by most accounts sounded stronger than anyone expected. Insiders who'd seen previous residency shows even noted this run had been running longer than usual, a small but telling sign of just how much stamina he'd rebuilt. Then came Night 8, July 23rd, and the moment we open with, 14 songs in. The voice that had carried an entire comeback narrative simply couldn't finish the job alone. A representative later told press it came down to a sinus infection, nothing more sinister than that, the kind of thing that would barely register for an ordinary singer. But that becomes front-page news when your entire tour is built around proving your voice can go the distance. Whether it was truly just a sinus infection or a body sending a warning after years of underlying strain is a question the official statement doesn't fully answer, and one the audience that night couldn't help but ask. What's certain is the moment itself, a legendary frontman, mid-set, quietly asking 20,000 strangers to carry a song he'd sung 1,000 times before, because tonight, for whatever reason, he couldn't do it by himself. 3 nights later, on Sunday, July 26th, Bon Jovi returned to that same stage for what was scheduled as the final show of the MSG run, and by most reports, delivered it in full, closing out the residency the way he'd hoped to all along. It was the kind of answer his story has leaned on before. Doubt followed by proof. But proof, in this case, doesn't erase the question that hung over the whole residency in the first place, whether a voice rebuilt by surgery and years of therapy can really hold up to the punishing pace of a full arena tour night after night, indefinitely. That question doesn't go away just because one night went well. The band still has 5 more dates ahead of them, stadium shows across Scotland, Ireland, and England, closing with a 3rd and final Wembley performance in early September. Whether that European leg proceeds exactly as planned or gets reshaped by whatever this MSG stretch revealed remains an open question the band hasn't fully answered publicly. What we do know is what Jon Bon Jovi has said repeatedly about where his own line is. He's told anyone who'd listened that he would rather walk away than perform as a diminished version of himself, that he has no interest in becoming what he's called the Fat Elvis, still on stage long after the voice that built the legend is gone. For years, that was a hypothetical, a promise made in interviews about a future he hoped to avoid. Now, with one shortened show already behind him this tour, it's a promise being tested in real time, in front of the exact audience it was made to. Maybe this was nothing more than a sinus infection catching an aging touring schedule at the worst possible moment. Or maybe it's a reminder that even the most disciplined comeback, backed by surgery and years of therapy, still has limits that no amount of willpower can override. Either way, the man who spent 4 decades convincing the world he'd never stop is now, once again, being asked to prove it, one night and one song at a time. So, what do you think is really going on here? A rock legend hitting a temporary rough patch on the road back, or a voice that's simply run out of road? Drop your honest thoughts below. And if you want to see how the rest of the story unfolds, check out the next video on your screen.